Hello, fellow wanderers tonight. You're stepping out of your modern sneakers and right into mud-caked boots, somewhere on the winding, torch-lit lanes of the Middle Ages. The air is thick with wood smoke and a little something that might be optimism, but is probably just last week's cabbage soup. Bells are chiming in the distance. Chickens are plotting mischief underfoot. And above you, the moon tries its best to play matchmaker over a town that hasn't seen indoor plumbing since, well, ever. Here's a fun fact in medieval Europe. People thought a pomegranate was basically a medieval dating app. Crack it open, and, if you're lucky, your future spouse is only one awkward family negotiation and 3 goats away. Tonight, we're not just peeking behind the curtains of ancient castles and creaky thatched cottages. We're eavesdropping on the first giggles, fumbled handshakes, sweaty palmed poetry, and the occasionally catastrophic courtship rituals that made the Middle Ages the true golden age of dating drama. Before we jump into the haystack of medieval romance, don't forget to nudge that subscribe button and throw a comment below if you're listening from Hanoi at 10:00 p.m. or Oslo at 17:00 with a mug of something mysterious. Let me know. I love picturing all of you perched on sofas, under blankets, or maybe even nervously holding hands with history itself. Now, flick off the lights. Let the gentle hum of your fan take the place of the distant minstrels. And join me as we slip into the candlelit corridors where hearts, and sometimes chickens, beat a little faster. You step outside just as the last bit of daylight squeezes through the clouds, slipping away behind a line of crooked rooftops and weathered watchtowers. There's a crispness to the air, somewhere between the tang of wood smoke and the ever-present whiff of livestock. And your boots crunch softly in the gravel, a rhythm that might as well be your heartbeat on display for the whole street to hear. If you listen closely, you'll catch the gossip of the wind, rustling secrets through shuttered windows and dangling laundry. Because, let's be honest, in a medieval village, privacy is as rare as a shower and twice as precious. Tonight, you're not running errands or dodging tax collectors. You're walking the wall for one reason: hope. Or maybe it's just curiosity, or the vague promise that someone will be waiting where the stone turns cold and the shadows grow long in the distance. A cat yowls, probably in love, or at least convinced it is, which is close enough for most of us. Suddenly, you spot her, or him, or them, cloaked and hunched against the wind, eyes darting beneath a hood, pretending to inspect the masonry when, really, everyone knows what's going on. The two of you draw close, passing with all the casual nonchalance of a knight in full armor trying to sneak through a bakery. Your fingers brush, and for a second, it's as if all the weight of feudal obligations and muddy streets disappears, replaced by a jolt of electricity. Or maybe just static from too much wool. A whispered hello, a quick exchange, a scrap of parchment slipped palm to palm, the ink still smudged from nervous hands. The whole encounter takes less than a minute, but in that moment, you could swear the moon winked in approval. Or maybe it's just the local baker watching from his window, already planning tomorrow's headline: 2 fools and a love letter. Romance along the ramparts. You turn, heart fluttering like a banner in a storm, and melt back into the night, shoes a little lighter, secrets tucked away, and dreams left to jostle with the rats for space beneath the city wall. Hush. Breathe. The night is young. You step under a crooked timber arch, the kind that leans just enough to make you nervous, but not enough to actually fall, and suddenly the world bursts open in color and noise and a certain kind of chaos that only medieval markets know how to pull off. You breathe in a mistake, but you do it anyway, and the air is thick with wood smoke, frying onions, and somewhere at the edge of it all, the delicate perfume of someone's soap, probably imported from 5 villages over and worth more than your shoes. Here, in the churning heart of the marketplace, dating isn't so much a ritual as it is a series of improvisations, a sideways glance, a coin pressed too slowly into the palm of a vendor, a plum accidentally dropped and retrieved with a smile that could mean everything or nothing at all. You join the flow, sidestepping geese and ducking beneath the swinging arms of a fishmonger who's got more opinions about marriage than fish, all of them loudly shared with anyone who lingers too long by his barrels. It's market day, which means everyone is here, Even old Gertrude, who hasn't left her cottage since the bishop's last visit, is squinting at radishes and spreading rumors with the surgical precision of a master blacksmith. You feel the pulse of the crowd, the friction of too many elbows and secrets, and, under it all, the bubbling sense of possibility. Somewhere, someone is looking for you, or at least, you tell yourself this as you try to remember if you actually washed your tunic this week. The world narrows to a stall lined with apples, their skins shining in the sun like jewels well. Medieval jewels, so mostly red and a bit bruised. You're not really here for fruit, but you pick one up, rolling it in your palm, eyes scanning the faces around you for a spark of interest. Across the stall, someone else, let's say her name is Marjorie, because all good medieval stories need a Marjorie does the same. She looks up, meets your gaze, and suddenly, it's as if the universe has conspired to choreograph this very moment. You smile, she looks away, or maybe she doesn't. Maybe she arches an eyebrow in that way that says, I see you, but I also see your mother, and she's 3 stalls down buying turnips. So, don't get any ideas. You want to say something witty, something worthy of a troubadour's song, but all that comes out is, nice apples, it's fine. Nobody said medieval romance was all poetry and moonlight. Sometimes it's just 2 people awkwardly holding produce and pretending not to notice the goats eating someone's socks nearby. Around you, the soundtrack is a symphony of bartering copper coins clinking, a farmer insisting his beans are blessed by Saint Margaret herself, the beans. Not the farmer, the high-pitched giggle of a child running from her mother. And, weaving through it all, the gentle gossip of women with baskets and thyme on their hands. You catch fragments. Did you see Lord William's new doublet red velvet as if he could afford it? Or, I hear the baker's boy is writing sonnets. For who? I wonder. Marjorie, still beside you, picks up a pear and inspects it as if it might reveal her future. You try again. A little braver this time. Care to trade my apple for your pear? She considers, weighing not just the fruit, but the offer, the intent, the audience. Because here's the thing about medieval dating. It's never just about the 2 of you. There are always witnesses, the neighbor with ears like a bat, the priest pretending to choose herbs, and, most dangerous of all, your own mother lurking somewhere within arm's reach. She hands you the pear, fingers brushing yours. A spark so subtle it's almost lost in the sunlight, but not quite. Deal, she says, her voice just above a whisper. But I warn you, my pears are famous for making young men propose. There's a pause, just long enough for the crowd to shift and a rooster to strut between you. Indignant and certain he's the true star of this scene. You laugh, and so does she, the sound rolling together in the crowded air. And for a second, it feels like the market stops just to listen. You drift together down the row, pretending to admire bolts of linen and stacks of eggs, talking about nothing and everything. She tells you about her sister's wedding last summer, how the wine ran out and the priest fell asleep during the vows. You share your secret fear that you'll never learn to dance properly, and she promises, perhaps rashly, to teach you. Provided you don't step on her toes or her pride, someone hands you a ribbon for luck, and you tie it around your wrist, certain it will bring you more trouble than fortune. Suddenly, the church bell clangs noon, a reminder that time doesn't stand still even for first meetings, and you realize the moment is about to slip away. Marjorie's mother appears, eyes sharp as thistles, and gives you a look that could curdle cream. You bow, clumsily, and she vanishes with her daughter, leaving you with a pear, a smile, and the realization that you've forgotten to buy bread again. As you walk home, the weight of the pear in your pocket feels like a promise, or at least an invitation to try again next week. Maybe you'll see her at the Midsummer Festival, dancing around the maypole with ribbons in her hair. Maybe you'll exchange glances across the pews at Sunday Mass, or find a note tucked beneath a market stall. Nice apples. You'll never know unless you try. And in the Middle Ages, that's as close to a happy ending as anyone gets, at least until next market day, when the apples are fresh, the rumors are flying, and your heart, against all odds, is still foolish enough to hope. Hush, breathe. The market fades, but the promise lingers. Step with me now out of the noisy, plum-scented chaos of the market, your shoes caked with honest mud, the hopeful weight of a pear in your pocket, and into the shadow of a stone church, where pigeons argue on the roof like old married couples, and the air always smells faintly of beeswax, wet stone, and the unshakable certainty that someone is watching. Here, the world slows. Here, courtship is less about secret hand squeezes and more about ritual, reputation, and, above all, chaperones those human scarecrows of romance, whose main job seems to be standing directly between you and the object of your affection. You arrive at Sunday Mass, heart fluttering somewhere between your throat and your boots, only to find the church packed tight peasant, noble, merchant, and smith, all crowded beneath a ceiling painted with saints and suspicious angels who look like they know exactly what you're thinking. You spot her Marjorie, or maybe this time it's John with the sheepdog eyes and the best singing voice in the village across the aisle, head bowed, lips moving through prayers with practiced innocence. You try to look casual, but your mother's hawk-eyed stare reminds you this is no place for scandal, especially not with Father Bernard watching from the pulpit, his sermons on virtue suspiciously well-timed around every harvest festival. The church bell tolls, echoing through the village, and every head bows just a little deeper, for a moment. You're lost in the rhythm of voices rising, incense curling, the sunlight spilling through colored glass and painting halos on everyone. Yes, even the baker's son, whose chief sin is daydreaming about cheese during confession. You half listen to the Latin chants, the drone of ora pro nobis, but mostly, you're calculating how many steps it would take to accidentally brush hands with your secret someone on the way out the door. Thus, for the record, too many. Medieval churches are expertly designed for crowd control and heartbreak. When Mass ends, the real performance begins. The main door opens, and the crowd tumbles into the churchyard, blinking in the sudden brightness, rearranging themselves into knots of gossip and wary parental supervision. You spot her again, Marjorie, fresh from prayer and flanked on both sides by a pair of aunts who look like they could outstare a gargoyle. Your heart leaps, then sinks, then tries to leap again before you stamp it down with sheer force of will. You stroll past, careful to keep your eyes modestly downcast, but she manages a glance just a flicker, as quick and hot as summer lightning, while her aunts argue about the price of onions. There's a message there, somewhere between maybe and run, but you take it as encouragement because you're young and the world is built on optimism, at least until the next sermon. A group of boys kicks a ball made of rags, aiming for the fence but hitting old Widow Percival's goose instead, launching a scandal that distracts everyone for exactly 12 seconds. You seize your chance, stepping just a little closer to Marjorie's group, pretending to be interested in the gravestones, or, failing that, the dandelions. She's talking with her cousin now, something about embroidery, probably, or how the new Lord Steward wears his hat at a suspicious angle. You nod along if she looks your way, smile if you dare. It's a dance slow, careful, full of pitfalls, and the music is the clatter of tongues and the snap of apron strings. A chaperone, you see, is more than just an obstacle. She, and yes, it's almost always a she is the living, breathing embodiment of every family's reputation, your mother's silent threats, your father's warnings, your great-uncle's stories of the one time a village girl got ideas and had to be married off to a turnip farmer in the next county. The chaperone sees everything, suspects everything, and, if given half a chance, will sabotage your budding romance with the efficiency of a medieval plague. Still, there are loopholes. Maybe it's the festival of St. Agnes, which means a procession and a little less supervision as everyone carries candles, sings hymns, and tries not to trip over their own feet. Maybe it's the annual church cleaning, when young people are inexplicably encouraged to work together, scrubbing pews and carving accidental initials into the choir stalls. Or maybe it's just luck a moment when the ants are distracted. The priest is chasing a runaway goat, and the world, for just a heartbeat, forgets to be vigilant. In that moment, you manage a word, not a poem, those are for troubadours and fools, but something small and clumsy and precious. "Hello," she answers, softly, with a quick glance sideways to check for witnesses. Hello? And in that single syllable, you build a future, a dozen dances, a string of summer walks, a shared apple beneath a tree, maybe a promise whispered before the sun sets behind the church spire. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. Tomorrow, her family might announce she's to be courted by someone else, someone with more sheep, more land, or, worst of all, more ants. The priest might launch a campaign against worldly distractions. The chaperones might triple in number. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll meet again in the churchyard next week, with a little less fear and a little more hope. As you walk home, the bells still ringing in your ears. You catch your reflection in the puddle by the gate. You look older, wiser, and just for a second, a little bit in love. The world hushes, the breeze shifts, and somewhere, far above, the angels in the stained glass windows smile a private. Knowing smile. Step outside, boots still muddy from churchyard squabbles and your head half filled with hymns, only to find yourself swept straight into the dizzying, fragrant whirlwind that is a medieval village festival. The sun is lingering just a little longer than usual, as if it too wants to see what gossip will bloom tonight. Banners flap, colors fly, and the scent of roast goose, apple tarts, and suspiciously alcoholic mead hangs thick as hope in the evening air. Welcome to the village fair equal parts Tinder, neighborhood surveillance system, and annual excuse for the entire county to pretend just for a night that life is full of new beginnings. You blink in the sudden brightness, momentarily blinded by a kaleidoscope of ribbons, wildflowers, and the kind of laughter that only erupts when there are no parents within earshot. Minstrels tune their lutes by the maypole, dogs snatch leftover pies, and somewhere a group of old women are already judging the dancing each step, each smirk, each stolen glance filed away for future reference. The rules of courtship have not relaxed. Exactly. They've just gone a little sideways. Out here, the chaperones are distracted by the bread pudding contest, and the old men have found something more interesting than scandal wrestling pigs for a bottle of last year's cider. It starts with a look, always a look, across the hay-strewn dance green. You spot her or him, cheeks flushed with sun and excitement, a flower crown askew, pretending not to watch you as she helps string up lanterns or balances on one leg to win a wager. Your pulse speeds. You remember, suddenly, every song you've ever heard about love and danger and haylofts. You make your approach, but you're intercepted by your best friend, who's convinced you can win the sack race, or your aunt who wants you to taste her improved recipe for carrot pudding. Spoiler, it's still carrots. You laugh, you dodge, you wait, love. In medieval times, is half patience, half luck, and all performance. The main event is the dance part ritual, part chaos, part sanctioned opportunity for unmarried people to touch hands in public without anyone summoning a priest. The musicians strike up a tune that's equal parts cheerful and wildly out of tune. You line up for the circle dance, palms slick with sweat, maybe from nerves, maybe from your aunt's carrot pudding. The girls are bedecked in ribbons and secrets, the boys trying to look both casual and extremely available. The pattern is set. Step, turn, swap partners. Try to remember which way is left. You find yourself face to face with her for the briefest moment. Her fingers brush yours, warm and a little calloused from chores. She smiles, quick and shy, and the world tilts on its axis for exactly 2 beats before you're spun away to the next partner. No one says anything about it, but everyone sees. Old men nod, women whisper, and the village idiot cackles in the corner, either because he's seen this all before, or because he's just dropped his last penny down the well. The dance goes on, a swirling carousel of hope and expectation. Sometimes, if the saints are in a good mood, you manage another accidental touch, a longer glance, a shared joke about the mayor's disastrous attempt at the hornpipe. Outside the dance ring, the fair teems with possibilities and pitfalls. There are fortune tellers, most of whom have never predicted anything more accurately than the weather. And there's always one suspiciously toothless crone who'll offer to read your future in chicken bones or apple peels. You might be tempted after all. If she says your true love is standing nearby, who are you to argue with fate and a handful of old bones? Just don't mention it to the parish priest. He's not a fan of divination, especially if it leads to giggling behind the hedge. The games begin in earnest tug-of-war, wrestling. A contest to see who can hold their breath the longest in the duck pond, surprisingly competitive. And the legendary catch the greased pig, which mostly results in everyone getting covered in mud. And one triumphant 5-year-old riding the pig straight through the dessert table. Laughter rings out, faces are red, voices are hoarse, and the sun dips lower, lighting the edges of the world in gold. You sneak away for a moment, hoping no one notices, and find her standing at the edge of the orchard, pretending to be interested in the apples. You walk up, pretending to be interested in the weather, and for one wild moment, you are both exactly the same kind of foolish. You talk. Careful at first about the harvest, about the weather, about who cheated at the maypole race. Words are code, full of double meanings and sideways glances. Her laugh is real, her eyes sharp, and you realize, somewhere between, did you see the pie eating contest and I think the baker's son let the goat loose on purpose? That this is the part they never put in the songs, the awkwardness, the delight, the way every sentence is a small rebellion against the usual order of things. Just as you're building up the courage to say something slightly daring. Perhaps next year we could dance twice. A voice rings out her cousin, or your uncle, or the bell announcing the start of the torchlight procession. You both jump, caught between guilt and laughter. She smooths her skirt. You adjust your hat, and just before the spell breaks, she slips you a ribbon blue, frayed at the end, the color of early dawn. For luck, she says, and disappears back into the crowd. You stand there, fingers clutching the ribbon, heart thumping like a festival drum. The world spins on, the bonfire crackles, and the night is alive with secrets, wishes, and the soft promise of something just beginning. A hush. The fire pops, sending sparks swirling up with the stars. You breathe, the festival, and the dream. Go on. You slip away from the fading laughter and ember glow of the festival, ribbon clenched in your palm like the world's most dangerous secret. The night air is sharp with the smell of cut hay, wood smoke, and the faintest promise of rain weather that encourages hiding under eaves or, if you're particularly daring, sneaking beneath the old stone bridge with its warty, moss-patched sides and echoes of last year's scandal. Here, away from nosy neighbors and gossip-prone chickens. A medieval romance has its best chance to grow legs, or at least sprout an ankle. Let's be clear, medieval dating is nothing if not a game of high stakes and low lighting. You can't text, you can't swipe right. Even eye contact in church can get you a week's worth of side-eye from every widow with spare time. So, you invent new ways to speak sideways, in code, with flowers, with ribbons, and, when the moon is particularly forgiving, with letters hidden in the oddest places imaginable. Tonight, under that bridge, you reach into your cloak and produce a scrap of parchment, inked by candlelight, with the best Latin phrases you could steal from last Sunday's psalm book. The words are clumsy, too earnest, possibly upside down. But in the world of forbidden romance, intention is half the battle, and the other half is not getting caught by the miller's wife, who walks her dog at the world's most inconvenient moments. You tuck the note into the knot of an old willow tree, as agreed third branch on the left, behind the lichen, above the spot where the frogs sing dirges for lost lovers. If you think this is overkill, think again. In the medieval world, love letters aren't just romantic, they're survival gear. Courtship is a dangerous sport, best played by night, with a code of silence and a healthy appreciation for plausible deniability. Everyone knows that Lady Marjorie met her sweetheart by the well, but nobody can prove it, especially since she swore up and down she was only drawing water for her mother's porridge. Sure, the porridge ended up tasting like rose petals, but that's a detail for the gossips to chew on. Letters travel between hands, sometimes between friends, sometimes by way of a bribed choir boy who's been promised 2 apples, and the right to snicker at your spelling. Each note is a treasure. Read and reread in secret, then burned or buried or tucked into a shoe for luck, if you're lucky. Your beloved writes back, if you're very lucky. She sends a token, a pressed laurel leaf, a broken coin, a length of thread that matches her Sunday dress. The medieval world may be short on privacy, but it's long on symbolism, Every object is a message, every color is a code. If you see a girl drop a blue ribbon in the marketplace, and you pick it up, you've practically gotten engaged in front of half the village and 3 chickens. Sometimes, the notes get intercepted by a jealous sibling, a rival, or the aforementioned miller's dog, who thinks parchment is a food group. When that happens, you quickly learn the value of plausible poetry. My dearest Sunbeam, you write, how lovely your hat looked at Vespers, which could mean anything, especially to the parish priest, who hasn't seen a hat in 20 years. Other times, there's no note at all, just the silent conversation of glances across the square, the careful timing of walks past the bakery window, the borrowed book of saints' lives with page corners folded on all the best lines. Your friends help, or hinder. As the case may be, one distracts the schoolmaster, another lends you her shawl, so you can pass for a distant cousin when you sneak into the scriptorium. Occasionally, there are blunders. You wave at the wrong window, you mistake a sheep for your beloved, you drop your only pen into the pig trough and spend a week composing sonnets in your head. But oh, when it works, the thrill of seeing a secret smile, the heat of a hand pressed quickly to yours, the way a single word soon can lift you 3 inches off the cobblestones. You begin to notice how everything conspires to help or hinder you: the weather, the market crowds, the bells ringing at precisely the wrong moment. You curse the geese for honking just as you attempt to whisper sweet nothings. You bless the festival for the mask it provides, for its chaos and noise, for the space between dances where a single word can slip, unnoticed, between all the watching eyes, for the truly daring. There are night visits climbing a garden wall, tiptoeing past a sleeping dog, praying the squeaky gate doesn't give you away. You might bring a token, a wildflower, a charm against nightmares, a crust of stolen bread. Romance is hungry work. You don't linger if caught. The punishment ranges from kitchen duty to exile to the silent treatment from every female relative for a fortnight. But those brief moments, moonlit and breathless, are worth it. The world feels suspended, as if even the saints are watching through parted clouds, grinning at your foolish courage. You whisper promises, half in jest, half in terror, about running away together. You joke about living on apples and day-old bread in the next village over. You swear you'd brave dragons, werewolves, and the wrath of the church deacon for another night like this. She laughs, low and soft, and says she'd follow you anywhere. As long as there's tea, morning comes, as it always does, with dew on the grass and the sound of someone's mother calling them home. You slip back through the garden, cloak smelling of lavender and hope, and tuck her ribbon into the lining. Maybe nothing will come of it. Maybe you'll marry elsewhere. Or maybe you'll tell your grandchildren about the night you snuck under the bridge and wrote poetry on scraps of old linen. Maybe the world will keep spinning on its usual axis of chores and duty. But you'll always have that laurel leaf, that ribbon, that memory of a night when the world seemed to pause just for you. The sun breaks over the hills. Another day begins. A hush. You breathe, and the story slips. Quietly. Into legend. You wake to the sound of bells, always bells, those relentless, clanging matchmakers that seem to know more about your love life than you do. It's market day, and the whole village is humming with activity. The smell of fresh bread and goat cheese mixes with the sharp, earthy tang of sheep and the not-so-subtle waft of excitement. Today is special. There's a marriage about to happen. Not yours yet. But who knows, in the medieval world. The line between observer and participant is thinner than the mayor's patience at the annual cider tasting. You shuffle outside, cloak slightly askew, eyes still heavy with last night's secret. The world is suddenly very awake, and so are the gossips. Old Agnes is already perched by the well, her tongue sharper than her needle. She's whispering to anyone who will listen about how that one meaning you obviously was seen talking to that other one meaning your secret flame, or possibly the baker's apprentice names aren't as important as implications. You give her a little nod, which is the medieval equivalent of turning off your read receipts. There's music today, not just the usual lonely lute, but the kind of full-bodied, foot-stomping, pipe and drum noise that makes your heart skip and your toes itch for a little mischief. The village square has been swept and decorated with garlands of wildflowers, fresh from the hedgerow's daisies, poppies, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance and, some say, to ward off bad breath. and worse in-laws. As you slip into the crowd, you realize that everyone is secretly auditioning for the role of future spouse, even if they swear they're just here for the honey cakes. The young men are busy pretending they don't care, which is why they've spent all morning washing mud from their tunics. The girls hover in groups, giggling over jokes that aren't really funny, but sound like bells when they echo through the morning. Your heart thrums in your chest, equal parts hope and dread. In medieval Europe, weddings are a social event, a legal transaction, a religious ritual, and, let's be honest, the best excuse for a party anyone's had in months. Love, maybe, but property, status, and alliances are always at the table, elbowing romance aside and scribbling their names all over the guest list. For the nobility. Marriage negotiations are the ultimate power game. Fathers in dark corners, mothers pretending not to scheme, and heralds writing contracts with more clauses than a forest has squirrels. Even among peasants, you'll find a kind of practical magic in how unions are forged, dowries are counted, cows appraised, a chicken or two thrown in for good measure. It's not just your heart on the line, it's your family's next season of lentils, if you're lucky. Your family likes your beloved, if you're less lucky. You spend your engagement dodging veiled threats and avert prayers for divine intervention. The church is involved, naturally. The priest acts as a sort of part-time Cupid, part-time human resources department. Do you take this person? He asks, and everyone holds their breath to see if anyone objects, if anyone faints, or if the groom's voice cracks like the last frost in April. But here's a little-known secret: not all medieval weddings are as solemn as the church would like. Before the rings and the blessing, and the parade of serious-faced godparents, there's the wild night before the Charivari, a loud, rowdy celebration where friends and frenemies alike show up to ensure nobody sleeps, and everyone remembers that this is, in fact, a life-altering event. Pans are banged, riddles shouted, practical jokes pulled, and, if the gods are merciful, someone ends up singing about turnips. You find yourself drawn into the dance, a dizzying, hand-to-hand blur of faces and laughter. You lock eyes with your secret crush. She smiles, the kind of smile that could turn a drought into a harvest. You trade glances, brushes of fingers, promises made only in silence, underneath the public show. Private negotiations go on a glance at your father, a subtle nod from her mother, the quick appearance and disappearance of a notary with a suspiciously fast quill. It's not all fun and games. Of course, there are rules. You need a witness, sometimes two, and a banns read in church for 3 consecutive Sundays, just in case someone wants to object or just likes hearing their own voice. If you're underage, you need permission. If you're marrying outside your village, expect a few raised eyebrows and possibly a request for references. The church keeps careful records, in some places. They keep the best secrets in town. At last, the ceremony itself. You stand before the altar, knees weak, hands sweating, wishing you'd worn your better shoes. The whole village is watching, including the miller's dog. The priest drones on. You try not to stare at your beloved, but fail miserably. Rings are exchanged, or sometimes not. Rings are expensive. Sometimes you just swap a belt or a spoon. Romantic, right? Vows are spoken in the vernacular, so nobody can claim they didn't understand what they were promising. The kiss, optional. The feast, mandatory. Out come the roast meats, the heavy bread, the pies stuffed with things you're not sure are legal in 3 counties. Wine flows, or ale, or whatever can be fermented and shared in mismatched mugs. There's music, dancing, more jokes about turnips, and always, the sense that something profound and hilarious is unfolding. As the sun sets, lanterns flicker along the lanes, and you slip away for a private word with your new spouse. You whisper dreams about the future, a cottage, a garden, a pig with less attitude than your mother-in-law. Maybe love will come, or maybe it was there all along, hiding beneath the bells and bargains. The crowd fades, the music slows, and for one breathless moment, you are alone together, partners in a world that makes its own rules. The hush falls, and for the first time, you understand why people write songs about this. You wake up with a start, heart thudding. the sunlight slanting through the warped glass of your new, not quite straight window. The wedding is over, but the echo of bells, laughter, and a never-ending stream of congratulations is still buzzing in your head like a persistent bumblebee. This isn't the fairy tale ending. It's the opening scene of a whole new chapter. Welcome to medieval married life, where breakfast is lukewarm gruel, privacy is a rumor, and every in-law believes they're an expert on the secrets of lasting happiness. You turn and see your new spouse beside you, blinking sleepily, hair in a tangle, face still painted with yesterday's excitement and today's nervous anticipation. No more stolen glances across the market stalls. No more chaperones breathing down your neck at every alleyway. You're in it together now. For better, for worse, for however many chickens you can keep alive this winter. The first rule of medieval marriage: there are no manuals. Well, that's not strictly true if you're a noble. Your parents probably slipped you a sheaf of advice written by a monk who has never seen a married woman outside of a stained glass window. If you're a peasant, you're making it up as you go, guided by your mother's warnings, your father's jokes, and whatever you manage to overhear through the wall of your neighbor's cottage. Breakfast is a team effort, or at least an awkward dance. Someone needs to fetch water, stoke the fire, sweep the hearth. You try to appear competent, but the wooden spoon feels like a weapon, and the porridge refuses to behave. Your spouse offers advice: too much salt, not enough honey, a touch of sage, or maybe a prayer to St. Lawrence, patron saint of cooks and, according to local rumor, the only one with the patience for your burnt bread. The chickens watch from outside, judging every move. Medieval domestic life is equal parts partnership and polite warfare. You're suddenly negotiating chores, inheritance, the correct way to hang aside a bacon, and whether your mother-in-law can visit just for a week, translation indefinitely. Furniture is sparse, so every item matters: a creaky bed, a battered chest, the single good chair reserved for guests, or the family cat. Whichever gets there first. There's no such thing as date night. Your romantic moments are stolen between chores, passing each other in the doorway, brushing hands as you knead dough, or sharing a secret smile when the whole house is finally quiet except for the steady drip of rain from the thatch. Privacy is a luxury. Your world is full of siblings, cousins, and that one uncle who insists he can sleep standing up in the corner. If you're lucky or unlucky, your new household also includes apprentices, farm hands, or even a boarder or two, each with their own opinions about your marriage and your skills as a host. The local priest drops by just to bless the house, but also to sniff out gossip and possibly score a cup of ale, if you're of higher status. The servants know more about your habits than you do, and your secrets are safer with the family goat. Disagreements happen. Sometimes it's about money, or the lack thereof. Sometimes it's about whether last year's cheese is still edible. Other times, it's about the precise location of the chamber pot, which, if you're not careful, becomes the most hotly contested spot in the house. Voices rise, doors slam, and then because life is short and chores are endless, you make up with a grunt, a laugh, or the offering of the last slice of bread. In medieval marriage, forgiveness is practical, not poetic. You can't afford a silent treatment when there's hay to stack before it rains. Every now and then, you catch each other's eyes across the table. Maybe you see a glimmer of the person you fell for, or at least the person you agreed to tolerate. There's comfort in the familiar rhythm of shared days, even when the work is hard and the rewards are meager. You learn to speak in code, one raised eyebrow for "help me," two for "the cat's eaten the fish again." The language of marriage is half words, half shared looks, and a deep understanding that you're in this together, come plague or good harvest. For some, children arrive quickly, bringing their own kind of chaos. The baby's cries are added to the rooster's crow and the distant shouting of your neighbor arguing with his cows. Sleep becomes a myth, replaced by the steady rhythm of rocking, soothing, hoping. If you're among the unlucky, you weather the storms of loss together, grief woven quietly through the fabric of daily life. Never spoken of, but always present, and yet, in the small pockets of calm. You sometimes find magic sitting together by the hearth as the last embers fade, telling stories or simply listening to the wind. You invent small traditions bred on Sundays, a walk by the river, the annual competition to see who can spot the first sign of spring, if you're very fortunate. You discover that love in the medieval world isn't the stuff of ballads or courtly poetry. It's practical, patient, and, when you least expect it, deeply sweet. The years roll on, the faces at the table change, the roof sags a little more. The world outside is always waiting to intrude with new laws, new wars, new gossip. You and your spouse grow older, maybe a little rounder, a little wiser, certainly a lot more skilled at making do. You finish each other's sentences and each other's porridge. And, on quiet nights, when the world is hushed and the last lantern has been snuffed, you reach across the blanket for a hand you know by heart. That's the secret. You realize, not the wedding, not the feasts, not even the first awkward days. It's the living, together, in all its stubborn, muddy, gloriously ordinary wonder. The world outside can keep its legends. In here, you've built a story of your own, a hush, and breathe. You can feel it in the air, that subtle crackle, like the static before a summer storm, or the tension in a baker's kitchen the day before Easter. Medieval villages, contrary to their calm. Storybook appearance were simmering cauldrons of rumor, suspicion, and intrigue. And if you thought modern love triangles were messy, oh, buckle up. Because here, everyone's business is everyone's business, and privacy is just another myth, like dragons or bread without weevils. Jealousy has always been a universal seasoning in the stew of human relationships. But in the Middle Ages, it comes with extra heat. Imagine yourself pausing at the communal well, your spouse a few steps ahead, baskets in hand. You can't help but notice the glance they exchange with the miller's daughter, the one with the suspiciously shiny hair, and the giggle that travels farther than the village bell. Is it just neighborly politeness, or the beginning of the kind of story that ends with your laundry mysteriously dirtier than it started? It doesn't help that everyone is always watching. The old women shelling peas at the crossroads know every secret before you do. The children, supposed to be minding the geese, are masters at eavesdropping and reporting back, wide-eyed, to anyone who'll pay in honey cakes. And the parish priest, well, he claims to hear nothing but prayers in the confessional, but his raised eyebrows tell a different story. There are rules, of course, mostly unwritten but as sturdy as the stone in the churchyard. Husbands should not tarry too long at the tavern after sunset. Wives should not be seen chatting by the hedgerow with the traveling peddler, no matter how many trinkets he offers. And nobody, and I mean nobody, should be caught alone with the local lute player unless they wish to be immortalized in a bawdy song. And yet, as every villager knows, rules are made to be gently bent, occasionally broken, and always discussed at great length over mugs of ale. Jealousy might start as a sideways glance, a muttered complaint, or the sudden appearance of an extra spoon in the soup pot. But it rarely stays small. You find yourself counting how many times your spouse visits the market, and whether it really takes that long to buy onions, or if perhaps there's something sweeter on offer among the root vegetables. You study your own reflection in the basin, wondering if your hair has grown dull, or if the lines at the corner of your eyes have deepened overnight. Sometimes jealousy bubbles into accusations, sharp words flung across the room like hot chestnuts. Why did you smile at her like that? Why did you let him carry your firewood? Voices rise, doors slam, and the chickens outside flutter away in alarm. Convinced that war has come at last, if you're lucky, the quarrel fizzles out in laughter or an uneasy truce, if not. The village soon has a new favorite scandal, whispered with relish in every corner. Of course, there's always someone who pushes things a step too far. Maybe it's the cooper's wife, who lingers at the riverside long after her washing is done, or the blacksmith who suddenly takes up an interest in poetry and is found reciting love rhymes to anyone with ears. Affairs happen, sometimes secret and slow-burning, sometimes spectacular and public, leading to broken hearts, broken dishes, and, occasionally, broken noses. The medieval world doesn't offer much in the way of therapy, unless you count a stern talk from the parish priest or a long, solitary walk in the rain. Public penance is a thing be prepared to stand outside the church with a bundle of birch twigs and a face redder than last year's cider if you're caught in flagrante delicto. The neighbors will try to look sympathetic, but don't be fooled. They're already taking bets on how long until you slip up again. And yet, the drama is never all bad. There's a certain electricity in the uncertainty. a liveliness to daily life that makes every trip to the well a potential adventure and every harvest festival a swirling dance of glances, hidden smiles, and the occasional surreptitious pinch, jealousy, for all its teeth. Keeps people on their toes. It sharpens the edges of routine and reminds everyone that, yes, even in a world where you might not own more than one good pair of shoes, desire is never in short supply. But don't let yourself drown in suspicion. The wise, weather-beaten villagers know that most things blow over with time, like autumn storms, or the village pig that insists on raiding the turnip patch every year. Sometimes, after the shouting, the crying, the awkward silences at supper, what's left is a deeper understanding, a rekindled spark, or at least the relief that your life will soon be yesterday's news. Some couples become legends in their own right. There's the pair who, after a decade of rumored affairs and epic arguments, are still seen walking together at dusk, arguing about whether the moon looks more like a wheel of cheese or a smudged silver coin, or the innkeeper and his wife, famous for their wild, jealous tempers, who throw plates at each other every full moon, then patch things up over bowls of stew before sunrise. In the end, these stories of love, loss, suspicion, and forgiveness are what give the village its heartbeat. You close your eyes at night and hear the soft creak of your own roof, the distant laughter from the tavern, the murmur of your partner breathing beside you. Whatever happened today, whatever rumors swirl tomorrow, you're still here, still together, still in the middle of your own perfectly imperfect medieval story. The drama fades, the air grows quiet, for now. Peace settles like a quilt across the room. A hush, and breathe. You step through the wooden city gates, ducking under a line of colorful pennants fluttering in the morning breeze. Suddenly, the world is louder, busier, and, let's be honest, a bit smellier than the meadows you've just left behind. The narrow streets are a river of traders, apprentices, stray dogs, and that one goose who thinks she owns the whole district. Welcome to medieval urban life, where love and dating have to squeeze in between guild regulations, the clatter of blacksmiths, and someone's chamber pot landing just a little too close to your shoes. You're not just anyone here, you are a hopeful romantic, one eye on your shopping list, the other scanning the crowd for someone special, if you're lucky. You might catch a glimpse of the baker's apprentice flower on his nose, and a smile so sweet you suspect he tastes the pastries more than he should. Or maybe it's the seamstress, her cheeks dusted with rouge and a cluster of pins clamped between her lips, as she argues with a customer over the price of a new bodice. The city is a tapestry of faces, each with its own secrets, ambitions, and tiny dramas. And you're determined to find your thread in the weave. Love in the city moves differently than in the countryside. There's less chaperoning and more chance encounters, like when you both reach for the same apple at the market, or when the priest's dog trips you in the square and your embarrassment becomes someone else's laughter. The city is a place for opportunity and risk. Anonymity means you can flirt with fewer consequences, or at least hope that if you make a fool of yourself, word won't travel faster than you do. Of course, that's only true if the town crier is napping otherwise. Every blushing glance is public knowledge by sundown. Medieval townsfolk have their own rituals. If you're from a respectable family, your parents will still try to arrange something suitable, usually involving a potential match from a rival guild bonus points, if it's a guild your father is currently feuding with. Because nothing seals a business truce like a wedding. You're expected to look your best on market day. Clean linen if you can swing it, maybe a borrowed hat if you're feeling bold, jewelry, if any. Is modest a single brooch, a carefully mended string of glass beads, or if you're the goldsmith's daughter, a ring that everyone pretends not to notice. But city love isn't all negotiations and business. Sometimes, it's a glance across the church nave during Sunday Mass, a breath held as you wait for your crush to light a candle and mumble a prayer, are they asking for rain, a better job, or for you to notice them. It's a scribbled note pressed into your palm at the feast of St. Agnes, promising to meet under the old willow after dark. If you're clever, you learn the secret routes back alleys lined with mossy cobblestones, stairways hidden behind taverns, the safe corners of the city wall where even the watchmen are too busy playing dice to notice a stolen kiss. City life means there's always a festival on the horizon. May Day, midsummer, The winter fairs, each one a swirling masquerade of flirting and hope. You get to play games, wear masks, and if the spirits are willing, dance until your feet are sore and your heart is pounding. The city is generous with chances for love, but it's also hungry for gossip. A stray rumor can follow you faster than a cold draft down a stone corridor. You'll want to be careful whose hand you hold when the bonfires burn low. And then there are the castles. If you are very lucky or unlucky, depending on your ambitions, you might catch the eye of someone from behind those high walls, a minor noble with too much time and not enough wisdom, or a clever lady in waiting with her own ideas about romance. Castles are their own universes, swirling with courtly love, the kind sung about in troubadour ballads, full of longing, pining, and elaborate metaphors about roses, falcons, and unattainable beauty. You might find yourself exchanging poems instead of apples, favors instead of bread. But don't let the romance fool you. Castle love comes with sharp edges, jealous rivals, political entanglements, and the ever-watchful eye of the dowager aunt who guards virtue like a dragon guards gold. If you're neither noble nor merchant, you might seek love in the communal bathhouse. Yes, you heard that right. Steam rising, laughter echoing off tiled walls, and the occasional splash from someone showing off. Bathhouses are more than places to get clean. They're social hubs where deals are struck, matches are made, and every so often, someone leaves with a smile that says, "I just met the one." Sure, you risk overhearing some slightly alarming details about the tanner's feet or the baker's latest rash. But you also might overhear a whispered invitation to meet at sunset, behind the apothecary, where the air smells faintly of lavender and intrigue. But the city is not without its heartbreaks. Lovers are separated by guild rules, class divides, jealous rivals, and, worst of all, those persistent parents who never run out of reasons why your favorite person just isn't suitable. Sometimes, a pair will run away together, vanishing into the mist before dawn, only to turn up a week later, sheepish and slightly hungry, ready to face the consequences of their boldness and hoping the magistrate is in a forgiving mood. Sometimes, love letters are intercepted, declarations misunderstood, and a single ill-timed joke can end an entire romance. Still, you wake each day hopeful. The city is a stage, and you are both actor and audience. Writing your own script with every step, you stand on the bridge at dusk, watching the lanterns flicker on one by one, and wonder if, somewhere out there, someone is looking for you too. And just as you're about to turn for home, you hear your name soft, uncertain, full of promise. You pause, a hush, and breathe. You hear the bell toll midnight from the church tower, muffled and deep. The kind of sound that feels like it's ringing inside your own chest. It's late, so late that the market square is empty. The shutters are drawn, and the city's stone streets have finally cooled after a long day of sun. Somewhere a dog barks, but otherwise, all you hear is the quick thump of your own heart. You're not supposed to be out. Not at this hour. Not with the moon spilling silver across the rooftops like a blessing or maybe a dare. But you're here. Anyway. Because tonight, you're running toward love and away from everyone else's plans. Let's set the scene forbidden. Love in medieval times is not just the stuff of wandering minstrels and tear-stained ballads. It's real. It's sweaty-palmed. It's risky in the way that makes your fingers tremble as you climb out your window. Or tuck a letter into the crook of a city wall. Or simply pause with your hand on the latch, whispering to yourself, just go. Maybe you're the shoemaker's daughter, and he's the son of a blacksmith who was supposed to marry the miller's girl. Or maybe you're the baker's apprentice and she's the scribe's niece too clever by half, and already promised to a merchant's family in a town you can't even spell. This is the hour for secrets, when everyone who matters is asleep and the ones who matter most are awake and waiting. You move through the alleyways, ducking under laundry lines and sidestepping puddles that reflect 1,000 tiny moons. You've memorized every loose stone and every squeaky hinge between your home and theirs. You carry nothing but hope and a badly sewn pouch of coins, just in case tonight is the night you don't come back. You meet by the city wall, where the mortar is cracked and moss climbs like a slow-motion fire. They're already there, hood up, nervously kicking at a pebble, glancing up with a look that says, Is this really happening for a moment? No one speaks. You just breathe, letting the night fill your lungs, sharp with the smell of damp earth and distant smoke. The silence feels like the world holding its breath. You exchange the smallest things, a smile, a squeeze of the hand, a letter tied with string and full of terrible poetry, or a pressed flower that was beautiful 2 days ago but is now more memory than bloom. It doesn't matter. You don't need grand gestures when every meeting might be the last. Runaway marriages are a medieval classic, though not for the faint of heart. If you're hoping for white horses and an adoring crowd waving handkerchiefs, think again. Medieval elopement is usually just you, your love, and maybe a cousin with an eye for trouble, plus a priest who owes someone a favor and doesn't ask too many questions. The only music is the pounding of your heart, and maybe, if you're lucky, a nightingale with bad timing. Marriage by mutual consent is technically legal, but good luck explaining that to your father when he comes after you, waving a rolling pin or, if he's feeling dramatic, his old crusader's sword. Sometimes you make it to the next town, hiding in the hay cart or the back room of a friendly innkeeper. Other times, you don't make it that far, the city gates are locked, or the watchman has been bribed to keep an eye out for 2 love-struck fugitives. The punishment. Usually a scolding, sometimes a fine, occasionally a stint in the stocks where you'll get pelted with old turnips and marital advice shouted from every window. Still, some couples do make it, turning up weeks later, married, a little hungry, and stubbornly in love, hoping everyone has moved on to the next scandal. Of course, forbidden love doesn't always end in escape. Sometimes it's the slow burn of longing, the heartbreak of separation. Maybe your families are rivals, or your religions don't match, or you're a serf and they're a freeman, and the laws of the land are as tangled as a fisherman's net. You see each other only at market, or from opposite sides of the church on Sunday. You send messages hidden in loaves of bread or sewn into the hems of tunics, tiny acts of rebellion that nobody else notices, except for that one busybody who knows everyone's business. Love letters, by the way, are a risky business if they're found. They might be read aloud to your family, or worse, to the whole town, every misspelled word, every embarrassing metaphor. It's not just your heart at stake, but your reputation, your family's standing, your entire future, even if you never run away. The act of hoping is its own kind of escape. You build a secret world together, a universe that fits between the space of 2 hands touching under the table, or a smile traded during Vespers. You count the hours until you see them again. Mark the calendar with saints' days and market days. Invent reasons to linger by the well, or buy more apples than you could possibly eat. You become an expert at pretending you don't care, while your whole body aches with wanting. Forbidden love is a teacher. It shows you how to wait, how to wish, how to risk everything for a moment in the moonlight. Sometimes it ends in heartbreak, sometimes in laughter, and every once in a while in the kind of love story that becomes a whispered legend, retold by grandmothers who definitely don't approve but can't help smiling anyway. The city sleeps on. Unaware, you tuck a curl behind your ear, squeeze their hand one more time, and promise to meet again, same place, same hour, under the watchful gaze of the moon, a hush, and breathe. You step into the heart of the village square, swept along by the thrum of a festival, the kind that only rolls around a few times a year, but is talked about for months on either side. There's music in the air, lutes plucking out clumsy melodies, tambourines keeping a beat that skips along with the laughter of children, and the deep rumble of grown-ups already on their second mug of cider. You smell roasting meat, spice cake, and the unmistakable tang of someone's failed attempt at ye old cheese experiment. This is not just a holiday, it's the medieval equivalent of speed dating with hay bales. If you're young, single, and have even the faintest blush of hope on your cheeks, this is where you come to see and be seen. Maybe you're wearing your best tunic, patched in all the right places, or you borrowed a silk ribbon for your hair from a cousin with connections. Maybe your shoes are muddy because you danced through the puddles, or maybe you're the shy type, hovering at the edge of the crowd, pretending to watch the juggler but secretly scanning for one face in particular. The point is, at a feast, everyone's looking for something love, luck, gossip, or just another pastry. The games begin early. Some are innocent enough apple bobbing, sack races, tug of war that inevitably turns into a muddy brawl. Others are a little more suggestive. There's the old kiss in the ring game, where you spin in a circle and whoever you land on owes you a peck on the cheek, or, if the elders aren't watching, something a bit more daring. Or the maypole, a whirl of ribbons and hands and nervous laughter, because if you're lucky, you end up holding the ribbon next to the person you've been daydreaming about since Candlemas. If you're unlucky, you get the local pig farmer's son who smells like onions and ambition. Dancing is the unofficial language of medieval flirtation. You're supposed to keep your distance. Of course, everyone knows the rules, but the rules are written in soft chalk and easily scuffed by the quick shuffle of feet. Maybe your hands brush for a heartbeat too long, or you spin and land close enough to count the freckles on their nose. The music speeds up, then slows, and you steal glances, each one a question and a promise and a dare. If you're brave, you make a joke. If you're bolder, you make a compliment something subtle, like, you braid your hair finer than the abbess's tapestries. If you're really bold, you just smile and let the silence say the rest. Let's not pretend everyone here is a love-struck swan. Some people are just here for the food, or to escape their chores, or to find out if old Margaret's punch really has moonshine in it this year. But for those on the prowl, the festival is the medieval world's Tinder. Courtship here is public, supervised, and full of opportunity for awkward moments. You try to impress, maybe you win a race or a poetry contest. Maybe you manage not to drop your partner during the reel. Maybe you just hold their gaze for a moment too long and feel your ears go hot. Then come the feasts, the long tables groaning under platters of roast meats, pies stuffed with everything from apples to eels, heaps of bread, and cheese so strong it could wake the dead. Wine flows, ale spills, and everyone suddenly believes they're a poet. This is when parents and matchmakers watch from the corners of their eyes, tallying who's laughing with whom. Which girl got 3 extra pastries from the blacksmith's apprentice? Which lad is refilling the same girl's cup a suspicious number of times? If you're clever, you deflect their gaze with small talk and larger helpings of stew. At some point in the evening, the elders might gather everyone for a round of storytelling or riddles. These aren't just for amusement, they're tests. Ways to prove wit and cleverness without having to wrestle anyone or risk losing a shoe. The shy ones shine here, spinning tales or solving puzzles with a twinkle in their eyes, catching attention in a quieter, more lasting way. Not all festivals are sunshine and roses, of course. Sometimes the weather turns. A cloudburst sends everyone scrambling under canvas awnings, or the bonfire smoke chokes out the moonlight. Sometimes there's a scuffle, a jealous glance, a spilled drink, a rivalry that's been simmering since last Michaelmas. Maybe you end up patching things up over a shared tart, or find yourself pressed shoulder to shoulder in the crowd, laughing in the rain. It's these moments, the sudden hush when the music pauses, the way you lock eyes with someone across the firelight, the shared secret smile when a pie goes flying, that make the night memorable. As darkness deepens and the last song winds down, you might find yourself wandering the edge of the crowd, hoping for a quiet word. Maybe you sneak away to the orchard, or just walk together down the muddy lane, kicking stones and spinning hopes. Words are clumsy, but sometimes a silence shared beneath the stars says more than any promise. And if you're not lucky in love tonight, there's always next festival, or the one after that. In the medieval world, there's no shortage of saints' days, harvest fairs, or excuses to gather, eat, and flirt like your future depends on it, because sometimes it does. The village square empties slowly, the lanterns guttering, the laughter fading to a few soft notes of song and the scuff of shoes on cobbles. You're tired, but buzzing. Maybe you found what you were looking for. Maybe you just found a story to tell. Either way, the night wraps around you like a warm cloak, and you let out a breath, long and slow, a hush, and breathe. You wake up the next morning with straw in your hair, the taste of last night's spiced wine lingering in your mouth, and the faint hope that you didn't dance too badly in front of the weaver's daughter. But before you can nurse your pride or sneak another chunk of yesterday's feast bread, you hear the real music of the medieval morning, the clink of coin, the rustle of parchment, and the low, serious voices of parents in negotiation mode. Welcome to that awkward stage where romance hands the reins to reality, and dating turns into a full contact sport involving your family, your neighbor's cousin, and anyone who has a say in your economic future, which, in the Middle Ages, is pretty much everyone. Let's be clear, love may have sparked your first awkward smile, but it's gold, wool, and a few prize sheep that'll carry you to the altar. You want to marry great. There's just the small matter of a dowry, an ancient ritual that transforms the gentle flutter of your heart into a hard calculation involving acres, casks, and the sort of math that makes you wish you'd paid attention during your Latin lessons. The air in your home is thick with the scent of beeswax and boiled onions. But today there's also the sharp tang of anticipation. Your mother is fussing over your best shirt. Your father is inspecting the family's ledger. And a neighbor's aunt is loudly comparing your prospects to what she's seen in Bruges. And they marry very well there. Let me tell you, you try to fade into the background, but everyone's watching, after all. This is when things get real. Negotiations begin with the subtlety of a siege. You sit in the main room, your hands folded, pretending not to listen as your father and the other family's patriarchs circle each other with questions about land, harvests, and the longevity of cows. The mothers compare linen, the aunts whisper about reputations, and at least one uncle tries to sneak in a joke about fertile fields that earns him a hard stare. In this world, marriage isn't just about two people. It's about alliances, assets, and making sure no one ends up destitute or, even worse, embarrassed in front of the neighbors. Dowries are the social safety net of medieval love. If you're the bride, your family's offering up coin, land, livestock, or if they're feeling fancy, a chest of imported silk. Maybe a silver goblet or a particularly nice goose. The bigger the dowry, the better you're standing. And if you think this is all old-fashioned, just ask yourself when you last checked someone's LinkedIn before agreeing to coffee. Some things never change. But wait, there's more. The groom's family isn't off the hook. They might be expected to match the dowry or provide a bride price of their own. And heaven help anyone who tries to skimp. These aren't just gestures, they're legal contracts. Written out by the village scribe in a hand so elaborate, it takes 3 readings to make sense of the word barn. The contract lists every sheep, every acre, every useful pot that's part of the deal. And it's all witnessed by a crowd of relatives who will absolutely remember if you try to back out. The process is long, noisy, and, if you're lucky, ends in a toast. If you're less lucky, someone storms out and you spend the next month dodging rumors about that time you nearly married the cooper's daughter, but couldn't agree on geese. There's a performance to it, a ritual as old as time. Even the nervous laughter and exchanged glances have their own choreography. Sometimes, if you're from a wealthy or noble family, things get even more theatrical. Now you're dealing with heralds, wax seals, and lawyers in weird hats, all debating whose grandfather insulted whose cousin's goat 3 generations back. You're not marrying a person, you're marrying an estate, a title, and the expectation that you'll produce heirs with decent table manners if you're the eldest son or daughter. Congratulations, the pressure's on. If you're the second born or lower, you might get away with a little more freedom, but don't count on it. Let's not pretend this is all romance-killing logistics. Sometimes, the haggling is almost flirtatious. A sly joke about dowries becomes a way to sneak a smile. A passing of hands over documents means fingertips brush in the candlelight. And if your future spouse brings you a handkerchief or a rose during the signing, everyone pretends not to notice. There's a giddy, secret excitement to it, a sense that beneath the solemnity, 2 people are making a promise in their own private language. And when the contract is signed, when the coins and livestock have changed hands and the last witness has eaten 3 pieces of spiced cake, there's a sudden shift. You're no longer just the miller's son or the brewer's daughter, you're a fiancé. People start addressing you differently, and every walk through the village becomes a practice parade for the big day. Maybe you're nervous, maybe you're relieved, maybe you're already wondering if you'll ever look as confident as your mother did in her wedding kirtle. But for now, you just breathe. The paperwork is done, the candles are burned low, you hear the faint echo of last night's laughter, and you catch your reflection in a pewter plate, a little older and a lot more certain. In the medieval world, a marriage contract isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of another chapter, one where love and logistics, longing and livestock, hope and hard negotiation all share the same roof, a hush and breathe. The sun rises like a blessing on your wedding day, gilding the thatched roofs and church spires with a honeyed glow that seems to promise just for once fair weather and fortune. You wake with the nervous certainty that your life is about to change. Though for now, the biggest change is realizing that your mother has been up since dawn, already fussing over your hair, your sleeves, and the exact number of petals required for the aisle. Welcome to the day when half the village has an opinion on your love life, and the other half is hoping for a free meal. You dress in your finest being a relative term, because unless you're a noble, your wedding outfit is probably the same tunic or kirtle you wear on feast days, just scrubbed a little harder and maybe adorned with a sprig of rosemary for luck, if you're lucky enough to be wealthy. You might get a new belt or a bit of borrowed jewelry, but even the humblest seam can feel regal when everyone you know is there to see you in it. Outside, the village is humming with anticipation. You can hear the distant clanging of church bells, more enthusiastic than tuneful, calling everyone from bakers to blacksmiths to leave their morning chores and gather at the church door. Old women press wildflowers into your hands. Children peek from behind stone fences. And your cousins have already started a whispered betting pool about whether you'll cry at the altar. The air is thick with the scent of baking bread, wet grass, and the faint, nervous tang of new beginnings. You try to keep your composure, but the processional itself is a test of endurance. You make your way through the village, flanked by family, neighbors, and at least 2 sheep who refuse to move from your path. The walk to the church is equal parts solemnity and chaos, part parade, part shuffling stampede, with every step accompanied by advice, jokes, and the occasional pinch from a mischievous aunt. Someone throws grain at you for luck. Someone else hurls a shoe for more luck. Though the symbolism is murky at best, and you try to keep your head high, pretending you do this sort of thing every day, the church stands cool and quiet, its stone walls thick enough to muffle even the most persistent gossip. You step inside, the musty air heavy with incense, beeswax, and the echo of prayers whispered by generations before you. Your heart thuds in your chest as the priest begins his incantations half in Latin, half in the local tongue, all delivered with the solemnity of someone who knows how much is riding on this moment. You exchange vows, sometimes with a ring, sometimes with a handshake, sometimes with a nervous glance and a promise to do your best. If you're lucky, there's a kiss. If you're less lucky, your spouse's uncle tries to make a speech and nearly sets his beard on fire with a celebratory candle. Then, as suddenly as it began, you are married, just like that. The words are spoken, the hands are joined, the contract is sealed, not just with signatures, but with the approving nods and raucous cheers of everyone you've ever met. You emerge from the church blinking in the sunlight, and the whole village seems to lean forward at once, eager for the real event, the wedding feast. Banquet tables groan under the weight of roast meats, stews, cheese wheels, and crusty loaves that could double as defensive weapons. Someone's aunt brings out a family recipe that looks suspiciously like last year's family recipe, but, as everyone knows, you don't question these things on a wedding day. There's ale, wine, and possibly something distilled in the woods that is technically legal but definitely dangerous. Musicians strike up a tune, and before you know it, your uncle is attempting a jig that would scandalize a Parisian, and your best friend is locked in a dance-off with the local shepherd. You try to steal a quiet moment with your new spouse, but that's almost impossible when the crowd is determined to keep you at the center of everything. There are games, some involving apples, some involving riddles, and at least one that ends with someone falling into a trough. There are toasts, each more embarrassing than the last, and blessings from relatives you didn't know you had. You eat too much, you drink a little more, and the world begins to blur into a warm, noisy glow. Of course, there are traditions. Maybe you're forced to sit on a special bench while guests sing increasingly risque songs. Maybe there's a symbolic bedding ceremony where the elders loudly escort you and your new spouse to the marriage bed just to make sure everything's official. You understand, if you're a noble, the ceremony may be more elaborate, with minstrels, knights, and speeches about family honor. If you're a peasant, you're more likely to get laughter, honest advice, and a friendly wager about who will wake up first tomorrow as the sun dips behind the hills Torches flicker and the dancing grows wilder. The music is sometimes beautiful, sometimes off-key, always heartfelt. You find yourself holding hands with people you barely know, swept up in the shared joy of a community that has seen you grow, struggle, and, at least for today, triumph, finally. When the last crumb is eaten and the last song is sung, you and your spouse slip away maybe to a modest cottage, maybe to a borrowed bed in a noisy household, maybe just to a quiet moment under the stars. The world is new, strange, and a little frightening. But as you lie together in the hush that follows a day of chaos, you realize this is what all the fuss was about. A new life, a new beginning, a story just waiting to unfold. A hush. And breathe. The sun has long since slipped behind the hedge of oaks, and the village green is littered with confetti by which, of course, I mean flower petals, errant peas, and one spectacularly lost shoe. You've danced, toasted, and survived at least 3 toasts from relatives who seem to believe that your marriage marks not just a union, but a kind of public sporting event. Now comes the part every minstrel forgets to sing about the day after the wedding, or, as you quickly learn, the first page of the next act. You wake to the sound of roosters, the dull thud of someone chopping wood, and the unfamiliar weight of a second body in the bed, which, if you're a peasant, is probably also shared by a snoring dog and the chill of the morning wind sneaking through the shutters. Your new spouse is next to you, breathing quietly. The entire village already assuming you are blissfully settling into the mysteries of matrimony, even if, in reality, your only real accomplishment so far is not elbowing each other off the straw mattress. Breakfast is different now. If you're living with your spouse's family, every meal becomes a theatrical performance where the audience expects signs of your affection or, at the very least, hopes for a juicy squabble. The in-laws are everywhere, like benevolent or slightly menacing ghosts haunting your porridge. Your new mother-in-law sizes you up, perhaps making a mental note of how you spread butter, while a younger sibling asks blunt questions about whether you snore, love, in medieval times. Isn't private, it's communal, practical, and occasionally the subject of a village betting pool. Your daily routine might not change as much as you expected. You both have work to do, fields to till, sheep to wrangle, bread to bake, debts to avoid, and, if you're a noble, perhaps a household to command or a tapestry to finish. Yes, those take years, and yes, you will be expected to act impressed by the neighbor's attempts. You might hope for romantic strolls, but you're more likely to get a brisk walk to the market with a basket of onions and a neighbor trailing close behind, angling for gossip. Evenings mean storytelling, patching clothes by firelight, or, if you're lucky, the odd moment alone when the household's finally distracted by a fox in the henhouse. And what about affection? Well, forget candlelit dinners for 2. You might manage a quick smile while collecting eggs, a gentle squeeze of the hand when passing the bread, or a fleeting kiss in the doorway when nobody's watching, in public. Subtlety is the rule. The last thing you want is the village priest adding you to his sermon under carnal excess. But in private, if you can find privacy, there's a sweetness in whispered words, shared secrets, and the silent pact that you're now facing the world together, for better or for worse, for harvests or for famines. Children, of course, are expected soon and often. The entire community watches for the first signs with the enthusiasm of fans awaiting a tournament, offering advice, blessings, and occasionally alarming herbal concoctions. If you're a noble, your child is not just your joy, but your insurance policy, your proof of legitimacy, your chance to secure a dynasty. For commoners, a new mouth means another hand in the fields eventually, and another excuse for the neighbors to stop by with swaddling cloths and barely concealed curiosity. Marriage in the Middle Ages is a partnership. Yes, but don't be fooled by romance novels. It's also a matter of negotiation, patience, and the occasional raised voice when the chickens escape or someone eats the last of the winter apples. You might quarrel about chores, about money, about whose turn it is to fetch water from the well on a freezing morning. But you might also find yourselves laughing at nothing at all, at the absurdity of life, at your neighbor's stories, at the thought that, against all odds, you found each other in a world where chance, fortune, and the local matchmaker all had a hand. For women, marriage often means new responsibilities and, sometimes, new freedoms. You might run a household, manage a budget, or oversee apprentices in the family workshop, if you're unlucky. You might gain a particularly cantankerous mother-in-law or a cow that refuses to be milked, if you're lucky. You become the hub of a small, busy universe: children, servants, animals, and all. For men, marriage is both a rite of passage and a source of new anxieties. Can you provide, protect, and keep your wife's relatives happy? The answer is usually, sometimes. On a good day, of course, not all marriages are made in heaven or even in the same postal code. Some are filled with quiet understanding, others with sparks, others with polite indifference punctuated by noisy family gatherings. If things turn truly sour, there are options. A priest might be consulted, elders might intervene, and, in the rarest cases, the law might be called upon for an annulment or separation. But more often, you muddle through together or apart, but always under the watchful gaze of a world that believes marriage is as much a community project as a personal one. The seasons turn, and so does your story. Winter brings the challenge of keeping warm and fed. Spring brings mud, lambs, and the first hint of green, plus another round of weddings, to which you are now expected to bring advice, gifts, and possibly a few horror stories of your own. You find comfort in routine, in the knowledge that you are not alone in your struggles or your joys. The small acts: mending a shirt, bringing home wildflowers, sharing the last apple, become the true measure of happily ever after. Sometimes, you wonder what your younger self would think of this life. Sometimes, you wish for adventure, but mostly, you marvel that, between the chores, the laughter, and the long evenings, love is not just something you feel, it's something you do. It's a loaf of bread shared on a rainy day, a promise whispered when the world is asleep, and the comfort of knowing that, in a world full of uncertainty, you and your partner are facing it all side by side. A short breath, a hush, and the fire burns low. So, you thought happily ever after was a smooth ride down the medieval love canal. Think again. Brave soul. Because if there's one thing the Middle Ages excelled at, other than inventing 3 types of plague and 1,000 ways to stew cabbage, it's making the business of love a complicated, occasionally catastrophic, but always entertaining affair. Welcome to the shadowy, candlelit corners of the medieval heart where marriages sometimes unravel. Side romances bloom in cloisters and haylofts, and the village gossips run a thriving, if unofficial, intelligence service on everyone's romantic shenanigans. Let's start with the inconvenient truth: medieval marriages, for all their fanfare, could be more like 2 oxen hitched together in the mud than a poetic duet beneath the moon. Maybe your spouse snores like a church bell. Maybe they're more interested in falconry than foreplay. Maybe your new mother-in-law has moved in and won't leave. Or perhaps, just perhaps, your heart has done something highly medieval, fallen for someone else, someone forbidden, someone who writes poetry, winks at you in church, and probably owns a suspiciously stylish hat. Of course, the church, that ever-watchful master of ceremonies, had some stern things to say about wandering affections. Adultery was officially a sin, and not just any sin, the kind that could land you in confession for an awkwardly long time. The village priest might offer pointed sermons about the dangers of lust, usually delivered with one eye fixed directly on the couple that arrived late to Mass and suspiciously out of breath. Still, sin and secrecy make strange bedfellows. And if you think medieval people were too devout to cheat, remember, even saints have complicated family trees. Affairs were as old as marriage itself, and the medieval world ran on a current of whispered flirtations, secret rendezvous, and the occasional haystack that saw more action than an entire season of courtly tournaments. If you're a peasant, your affair might be as simple as stolen glances at the May Day dance, a sly tryst behind the alehouse, or moonlit conversations in the cabbage patch. If you're a noble, things get trickier and sometimes more dangerous. You have private gardens, secluded towers, and servants to bribe, plus a spouse who might be plotting 3 moves ahead. Nobles perfected the art of hunting parties that ended far from the actual hunt, And let's just say troubadours weren't always hired just for the music. Sometimes, love triangles turned downright operatic. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of France, then England, lover of poetry, rebellion, and, apparently, complicated family dinners. Or Lancelot and Guinevere, whose forbidden affair was the medieval version of a viral scandal, complete with heartache, sword fights, and one extremely disapproving wizard. Don't get the wrong idea, most affairs didn't end in epic poems or civil wars. But that didn't make them less dramatic, especially when the wrong person found out. And someone always found out. Which brings us to the great game of annulment, medieval style, divorce officially off the table. But annulment the magical, this never happened button was possible, provided you had a good story and, preferably, friends in high places. Grounds for annulment range from the practical, my spouse is a closet heretic, to the inventive, we're related in the fourth degree, and didn't realize until we'd already named the pig after Aunt Matilda. If you could persuade the bishop, or, better yet, the pope, that your union was null and void, you might walk away free. But don't expect to keep the wedding silver. For ordinary folks, annulment was a rarer bird, more likely to be granted if the union had never been consummated, or if it turned out you'd accidentally married your third cousin twice removed, which, given the size of most villages, was always a statistical possibility. The paperwork was lengthy, the process slow, and the public humiliation guaranteed. But for those desperate to escape a miserable match, the chance was worth it. Irreconcilable differences didn't exist as a legal term, but my husband hasn't spoken to me since Michaelmas might get a sympathetic hearing from a particularly lenient priest. If you were lucky or unlucky enough to live in a royal household, things became even more theatrical. Kings and queens were expected to provide heirs, not heartbreak, but history is littered with monarchs whose wandering eyes and hands changed the course of nations. Sometimes, these affairs were barely secret. Entire courts knew who was in favor this season. And letters full of longing or scandal made the rounds faster than news of a new plague. The penalties for infidelity, however, could be severe, especially for women exile, imprisonment, or even execution if your name was Anne Boleyn and your husband's favorite pastime was collecting wives and losing patience. But don't get too gloomy. There were love stories too. That defied the odds, couples who fled together, braving the wrath of family and feudal law, or husbands and wives who, despite arranged beginnings, genuinely fell for each other and weathered every storm together. Sometimes, a quiet understanding formed a truce, a partnership, even a friendship that outlasted the first thrill of attraction. Some marriages grew into love rather than from it. Some lovers found in their brief encounters a sweetness that made the rest of life bearable. And through it all, the village gossips watched, whispered, and recorded every scandal in their unofficial book of secrets. Children grew up on stories of Lady So-and-so's elopement, or the time old William got caught sneaking out of the miller's wife's window. The moral, if there was one, was this love is a wild animal, not easily tamed by law, custom, or the threat of penance. The Middle Ages, for all their rules, could not contain the unruly heart. So, if you find yourself in a medieval marriage and the world starts spinning sideways if forever feels too long, or the temptation of a lute player grows too strong, remember you're just another player in a very old game, filled with longing, laughter, sorrow, and the occasional annulment application written on the back of a borrowed prayer book. And as the candles gutter low and the stories drift on, you realize the medieval heart was as restless, brave, and foolish as any that came after. A hush falls, a breeze rattles the shutter, and all the old secrets sleep for now. If you thought medieval romance was all muddy marriages, squabbling in the cabbage patch, and the occasional emergency annulment, prepare to be swept off your feet right into a world where love is an art form, chivalry is a competitive sport, and everyone is absolutely, fantastically, impossibly dramatic about it. Yes, welcome to the golden age of courtly love, where flirting was both high stakes and high fashion, and a single glance across a crowded feast could launch 1,000 sonnets or, at the very least, a dozen terribly written poems about a lady's eyebrows. You don't just fall in love here? No. You are caught in a web of riddles and ritual, spun tighter than the lacing on a knight's best tunic. Imagine you're perched on the edge of a tapestry-draped dais at the high table, goblet in hand, watching as the minstrels tune their lutes. Candlelight glimmers off gold plates. The hall murmurs with conversation, layered like so much rabbit stew. Suddenly, a glance a brief, daring glance from a veiled lady or a rakish squire. Electricity, or, at least, the medieval version, heart palpitations and mild indigestion. Here's the thing, this is not your average village romance. Courtly love, or Finamore if you're feeling French, is a world apart. It's more theatrical than practical, more poetry than passion, and absolutely obsessed with rules. The object of your affection is, more often than not, someone you are absolutely not supposed to love, a married noblewoman, perhaps, or a knight already pledged to someone else, which, of course, makes it 10 times more exciting. Forbidden love is practically the house special. You feel the weight of tradition as the flirting begins. There are no direct declarations, no you-up messages scrawled on parchment, no every gesture, every sigh, every accidental brush of the hand is loaded with meaning. Knights compose riddling verses, sometimes delivered in secret, sometimes performed at tournaments where everyone pretends not to know who the lady, with eyes like a summer storm, actually is, even though her husband is looking murderous at the end of the table. The language of flowers blossoms in this world, too. A red rose tucked in a glove, a secret declaration, a sprig of rosemary remembrance, a daisy innocence, or at least plausible deniability when the mother-in-law starts sniffing around. You quickly realize you need a personal botanist just to keep up with the subtext. And then, there are the games. Oh, the games picture a May Day gathering in a castle courtyard, with lords and ladies exchanging riddles, or composing impromptu ballads about the virtues and, more often, the ankles of their chosen muse. Sometimes the stakes are deliciously silly. The loser of a love poem contest has to serve the winner wine all evening. Sometimes they're a little more serious, with knights vowing to perform heroic deeds for nothing more than a handkerchief or a fleeting smile. This is the era of unattainable love, and the more unattainable, the better. Of course, it's not all moonlight and metaphor. Sometimes, flirting at court can feel like running an obstacle course lined with nosy chaperones, jealous rivals, and at least one eavesdropping monk scribbling notes for a future sermon, if you're clever. You make your declarations in code, a phrase in a song, a gesture during a dance, a letter hidden in the lining of a falconer's glove. Medieval Tinder, eat your heart out. The queens of this romantic game are the ladies' fair women who, despite being mostly treated as dynastic chess pieces by their families, manage to wield enormous soft power through wit, grace, and the ever-potent art of pretending to faint at the right moment. The most skilled can break hearts with a single arch of an eyebrow. The less skilled, well, sometimes their love notes end up in the wrong hands and dinner gets a lot more interesting. Every great courtly love story has its iconic duo. Maybe you're picturing Abelard and Heloise, the philosopher and the nun whose love letters could still make a 21st century inbox blush. Maybe you hear the distant clatter of Lancelot's armor as he pines hopelessly for Queen Guinevere, doomed to worship from afar and occasionally joust for her honor or just to impress her dog. Even the troubadours themselves, wandering poets with slightly questionable hygiene and hearts full of rhymes, get swept up, composing ballads for ladies whose husbands have conveniently gone hunting. Don't think for a moment that all this was confined to nobles. The courtly love playbook seeped out into manor houses, market towns, and the daydreams of anyone who could find a piece of parchment and enough ink to sketch out a rhyme. Even peasants tried their hand at the rituals, though, for them. The prize was more likely a stolen kiss behind the grain store than a rose-scented serenade. Still, for all the artifice, there are moments of genuine tenderness, a hand lingering on a cloak, a whispered joke in the rushes, a verse left beside the bread oven. You see longing and frustration, courage and foolishness, all tangled together in the torchlit corridors. Sometimes, love is requited. Sometimes, it ends in tears or the slow, resigned laughter of people who know that desire, like spring, always returns at the end of the night. As the hall quiets and the candles gutter, You slip outside and feel the cool air tinge with the sweetness of night-blooming flowers. Somewhere, a poet mutters the first line of tomorrow's sonnet. Somewhere else, a knight clutches a handkerchief like a trophy. And you remember the way a single glance can change everything, and how sometimes the best love stories are the ones that never quite reach their ending. The wind sighs, the torches flicker low, and the song of longing floats just out of reach. Let's be honest, nothing in medieval life moved faster than gossip, except maybe plague. But gossip had a better sense of timing. Tonight, you step out of the firelit hall and into the labyrinth of secret loves, coded letters, and some truly spectacularly bad decisions. Because when it comes to medieval romance, secrecy is half the thrill and half the disaster. Imagine it's late. Maybe the moon is thin as a coin, and you are clutching a folded bit of parchment so tightly your fingers are stained with ink. This is not just a shopping list or your cousin's IOU for a lost chicken. This, dear listener, is a love letter. Not just any letter. Either this one is the product of an afternoon spent sweating over rhymes and metaphors, dodging nosy ants, and begging the family priest not to check your pockets. The contents. An explosion of fairest of all blossoms and cruel tyrant of my poor heart, because in the Middle Ages, nobody just said, "I like your smile." They compared it to the dawn, or possibly to a perfectly ripe pear. But it's not the words that matter most, it's the risk. Delivering your missive is an Olympic event, if you're a noble. Maybe you press the note into the hands of a trusted maid, who will then slip it under a pillow or into a carefully hollowed loaf of bread. If you're a peasant, you might just toss a carved love token through the window and hope it doesn't land in the stew. And of course, everyone swears they're subtle, but as you'll quickly see, most people in the Middle Ages are about as sneaky as a rooster in a confessional booth. Let's say you're the lucky recipient of one of these letters. You find it in your embroidery basket or stuffed inside your psalter. Your heart pounds. Is it from that handsome stable boy, the poet with too many teeth? Or scandal of scandals, the wife of the baker who keeps giving you free buns? You sneak off behind a tapestry to read it, eyes darting in every direction. Because there's always that one servant who is basically a medieval surveillance drone with the power of prayer. For the privileged, there's an entire etiquette to clandestine communication. Nobles have the resources, latticed windows, elaborate gardens, even private chapels where you can meet under the watchful eyes of at least 3 saints and a bored dove. You might exchange tokens: a ring, a ribbon, the all-important glove. Every item is charged with meaning, and every exchange is a risk. Courtly love is a team sport, requiring accomplices and lookouts, not to mention a working knowledge of Latin puns. The messages themselves are often written in code, sometimes in the actual language of code, like a cipher, but more often in layers of plausible deniability. I dreamt of a white stag last night might mean, meet me behind the stables after Vespers. Or it might mean you actually dreamt of a white stag, and now you've accidentally invited your crush to a very confusing wildlife encounter. The middle and lower classes have their own strategies, if you're a miller's daughter. Maybe you and your beau carve your initials into the old oak tree, or arrange to accidentally bump into each other at the spring. Maybe you leave wildflowers on the doorstep, each petal a little rebellion, if you're lucky. Your trysts are protected by nothing more than the darkness and the world's oldest alibi. I was helping Mother with the laundry. Of course, secrecy is hard to maintain. Medieval houses are not known for their privacy. Thin walls, communal fires, doors that never quite fit. An entire household sleeping in one smoky room, the odds are not in your favor. There's always a brother, a nosy neighbor, or a goat with a sixth sense for romance. And if you live in a castle, don't even think about sneaking out. Those stone corridors echo, and the night watchmen love nothing more than a good story for the kitchen staff. But the real danger isn't being seen, it's being heard about. The grapevine in a medieval town is thick and always in season. The minute you so much as glance at the wrong person for a little too long, the rumors sprout like mushrooms. Did you see Lady Marjorie at the well? She dropped her bucket right when Thomas passed by, surely a sign by sunset. Half the village is convinced there's an elopement planned, and possibly a royal bastard on the way. If you do get caught, and let's face it, most do, the consequences can be wildly unpredictable. Sometimes it's just a tongue lashing from the family or being sent to pray in the coldest chapel. Sometimes, if you're unlucky or unwise, it's exile, the convent, or a rushed wedding with someone you barely know. In rare cases, things get spicier. A knight might challenge a rival to a duel, or a spurned lover pens a poem so tragic it becomes required reading for future generations of heartbroken teens. You'd think all this risk would discourage secret love affairs. Not a chance, if anything. It just raises the stakes, the more forbidden the affair. The juicier the story. Medieval love is a kind of theater, and every lover, secret or not, is an actor in a never-ending play. Now and then, though, you witness a moment so tender and true that all the secrets, the risks, and the misadventures fade away. Two people meeting in the moonlit orchard, holding hands and whispering their dreams, knowing that even if the whole world finds out, for this brief moment, they've outwitted everyone, even the gossips. Then a rooster crows, a maid screams, and the day begins again. Another letter, another plan, another heartbeat that risks everything for one more secret. The game continues. The world listens. And somewhere, under the rafters or behind a crumbling wall, another note waits to be found. You made it. You survived the matchmaking, the suspiciously well-informed aunts, the wandering minstrels, and maybe even a secret letter or two. Now, you are married, or at least, you've managed to fake your way through a 3-day feast, an exchange of vows, and the bestowing of so many symbolic ribbons and rings that your arms feel like they've been attacked by a color-coded octopus. You might think that the real adventure is over, but no married life in the Middle Ages is where the real, strange, often hilarious journey begins. Let's step quietly into your new life, and don't trip over the dog sleeping by the hearth. Your first morning as a married couple is not so much a private moment as it is a communal spectacle. If you're noble, half the household is waiting outside the bedchamber door, giggling, gossiping, and holding a goblet of wine just in case the situation requires a toast or a bribe. There may be witnesses, actual witnesses, to your union, because nothing says romance like your mother-in-law making sure you sealed the deal, if you're lucky. The only audience is a handful of servants armed with fresh linens and advice you did not ask for. The bed itself is a curious thing, feather-stuffed, if you're rich. More like a pile of straw if you're not, often shared with at least 2 cats, a small child, and a draft that whistles like a banshee. The sheets are clean, or cleanish, and smell faintly of lavender, sweat, and last night's onion stew. You are now officially a married person, which means you can expect a lifetime of compromise, negotiation, and if the fates are kind, a little bit of affection snuck in between chores, plagues, and the occasional crusade. Day 1 is a blur. Family members drop in, sometimes literally, bearing gifts, advice, and that one uncle who always just happened to be in the neighborhood. You're paraded through town, showered with wheat, a fertility wish, and, frankly, a mess, and possibly serenaded by the village band, whose knowledge of key signatures is as shaky as the town's foundations. There's more food, more wine, more congratulations, and if you're peasant folk, a round of slightly tipsy dancing in the mud. But what's married life actually like? Well, it depends. Nobles might find themselves juggling estate accounts, negotiating dowries, or exchanging passive-aggressive poetry about who left the firewood out in the rain. Peasants work side by side in the fields or at the loom. Their lives so intertwined that the difference between love and habit becomes as thin as a worn apron string. Don't imagine for a second that romance disappears after the vows. It just goes underground, trading dramatic declarations for knowing glances over the dinner pot. The most devoted couples might still sneak kisses behind the barn, exchange homemade tokens, a wooden spoon, a hand-stitched shirt, or even compose a little tune for the lute, though everyone will pretend it's just about the weather, if you're lucky. You discover that real intimacy grows not from secret letters or stolen apples, but from a shared bowl of soup on a cold night, or the way your partner remembers to save the last piece of bread for you. Now, about privacy, let's just say. In most medieval homes, there isn't any. Walls are thin, windows thinner, and doors might as well be painted lines on the floor. You share your space with children, animals, cousins, and, on bad days, the entire village when it rains. Conversations are overheard, secrets are rare, and the concept of alone time is best described as a myth invented by poets who lived in towers. But despite all this togetherness, or maybe because of it, married couples carve out little pockets of tenderness and, yes, passion, candlelit nights, whispered jokes, fingers tangled in the dark. If you listen closely, you'll hear laughter, sighs, and the creak of the old bed frame life's music, played out in two-part harmony. Of course, not every marriage is a love story. Some are arranged alliances, brokered by families who see property first and passion as an afterthought. Some unions are storms, quarrels over livestock, who gets the best blanket, or whose mother visits too often. But even in the roughest marriages, there are moments of truce, of shared worry when a child is ill, or fierce teamwork when the harvest is threatened. Marriage, in the Middle Ages, is rarely a fairy tale, but it is rarely dull. Children arrive, sometimes in droves, sometimes not at all, and they become the glue in the chaos of the household. You teach them songs, scold them for chasing the pig, worry over every fever. You might lose some life, is sharp-edged and fragile, and grief is a shadow at every hearth, but you carry on, as everyone does, finding joy in the ordinary miracles of daily bread and a child's laugh. Through it all, the community is never far away. Neighbors judge, help, meddle, and rejoice in your fortunes. Festivals mark the calendar: May Day, Christmas, the local saint's feast. Each is an excuse to dance, to remember why you chose or were chosen by this companion. You'll sit together by the fire, sharing a crust, a story, maybe a dream for better days. And when gray streaks your hair and the world changes around you, new lords, new plagues, new fashions, you'll look back, maybe with a smile, maybe with a sigh, and realize that happily ever after is less about magic and more about endurance, laughter, and learning how to sleep through snoring. So here you are, at the close of a long, winding medieval romance. From awkward courtships to raucous weddings, from secret letters to the gentle intimacy of daily life. You've wandered the byways of medieval love, and maybe caught a glimpse of what kept hearts beating beneath all that wool, armor, and expectation. A hush falls, the fire burns low, and somewhere, a new story is beginning. Breathe in, let go, and drift onward. Friend History's dance continues, and so do you.